Hi again. I want to talk about the tarot, and this time particularly in terms of decks. I made a video about 9 years ago about decks, and I spoke about the wider rate as a good one to start with, and then I'd moved on to the Thoth deck, but I said it isn't for everybody. So it's here we are all these years later. People still ask me about what kind of decks to use and stuff. Well, I think that it's important to not get stuck with one deck. I think it's you're not challenging yourself at the subconscious level when you are completely familiar with the same deck all the time. Now, there's nothing wrong with it per se, but I think that because of how the tarot works, creating a visual roadmap to the subconscious mind is just like the cognitive mind in that it seeks novelty. Novelty is what allows it to develop and to process new information in different ways. So, for instance, if you're, nobody, you always talk about people being institutionalized, and that's a very real thing. They can't change, they can't do nothing new. I've met so many people like that in my life, and if when they're confronted by something new, they have an immediate not hostile reaction, but very negative reaction. It won't work, and it hasn't even been tried. It's a fear of moving on because they've developed a neurological relationship with the process, and that neurological relationship is so deeply ingrained within their neural pathways, that the neuroplasticity is almost solidified, and they can't move on. So they never develop or adapt as people, and this is what you always have to remember. People are often very institutionalized, and I think to be good with the tarot, I think you have to be more dynamic in your cognitive processing, because it's the interpretations of the symbols that allow direct access to the subconscious mind. Now, as I've spoken many times, I don't use the cards for divination. I don't particularly have an interest in divination. If you do, that's fine. I don't. What I use the cards for is a form of self-psychoanalysis, and also helps me think it through a situation. So I'm dealing with a situation, good, bad, challenging, or just trying to figure something out. Because the visual imagery in the card allows me to process it in terms of pictures rather than words, and this allows me to think differently about it, because my subconscious mind, because it sees in symbols and shapes, as it is, and archetypes, because it's older than the human language or human written language, and also speech, that it deals particularly in symbols. Now, if you get stuck in the same symbols all the time, the same issue with institutionalization and lack of cognitive dynamism takes place as well, and you're not as good. So, for instance, you may have a certain relationship with a card, say the Ace of Cups, whatever, or any card, and you keep that a very strict interpretation. It almost becomes like religion, and it starts to dominate the process, and it shuts out any kind of alternative way of looking at it. And the best way to deal with this is sort of to get away from this visual symbolic institutionalization, is to vary your tarot decks. Now, most people start out with the Rider-Waite deck. It's flawless. I can't fault it in any way. It's still a fantastic unsung masterpiece of Western art, not because it's fantastic artwork or anything like that. It's because it does the job so beautifully and allows people to learn the tarot so quickly, the symbols and the cards and the meanings of the cards. But again, you get stuck there forever. So another deck that I moved on to was the classic Italian deck, which was a beautiful Baroque deck that has on the side a handy words in four languages to give you a basic meaning of what the card is. So, it's not like an in-depth meaning, but sometimes it helps. It also helps if you're reading for somebody else. And I like the Baroque imagery. It's very soothing. It feels very, very nice. There was another deck I used. I didn't like it at all after a while. I think it was called the Wildwood Tarot. It kind of has druidic or Paleolithic, Neolithic elements in the cards, and after a while I didn't feel comfortable with that deck. There was a nastiness about it. I can't explain it. I just don't like. I just didn't like it, and that's the thing. If you have a deck and after a while you don't like it, you don't feel right with it, don't use it. That's an important thing. And that's only happened to me with one deck, the Wildwood deck. And there's nothing wrong with the deck. It's quite nice how it's done, the artwork, and there's just something didn't feel right about it. And there's other decks too. Now the Crowley, the Thought deck, is kind of dark, and the cards are generally a small size, so you're amplified visually into a small space. When I say dark, I mean deep. I should really mean deep. And some people think that it's like a cursed deck because Crowley was a devil man, but it's nothing like that at all. It's very Kabbalistic and very astrological in nature. And it also has strong Hindu and Buddhist elements to it. So it's nothing pagan at all about it. Having said that, it's a very well-designed deck in terms of the cards have very severe meanings. So, for instance, like the Ten of Cups or the Eight of Cups is quite lush and beautiful, where you'd have like the Five of Swords and the Five of Cups, very dark, very intense. And this, the major arcana cards are almost indistinguishable from the minor arcana cards in the Thoth deck, because generally there's a very different feel to the major arcana cards in decks than to the minors, and yet in the Thoth deck they all seem to be the same, which is kind of a pretty amazing achievement by Lady Farida Harris to get that vibe about them, because the two arcanas work together. And so always vary your decks. But one thing I will say with cautionary warning is don't go mad using different decks all the time, because then it just becomes a mess. Now, there's nothing wrong with collecting tarot decks as a hobby. Lots of people do, and it's a great, it's just like collecting paintings or comic books, there's so many fantastic art deck tarots out there, and there's fun ones as well. And it's, at the end of the day, people say, which is the best one? Well, the best one is the one that resonates with you. It could be absolutely anything. It doesn't matter. It's personal to you. And the worst one is the one that doesn't resonate with you. And that's very important. It's very important to pick one. And so I always say, well, dive in first with the Rider-Waite deck, and get used to that. Learn everything about the symbols. So if you can pull a random card, you know what it means. That deck is very useful because it's very literal in that sense. And then from that, move on if you want, but I suggest you do. And I don't mean immediately. I mean or I had a second deck. Sometimes, my go-to deck is an Italian version of the Rider-Waite, which it's kind of like a it's not the Rider-Waite Radiant one. This one was printed in Italy, and I got it in Turin, and I've been using it a lot now recently. And it's got slight variations on the Rider-Waite deck. Actually, they're very better ones as well. They're better variations. They've improved on it, and it also has things like a gold leaf type effect on it. And so it feels kind of classy, and it feels like it has a sacredness about it. It's almost like when you pick out these cards and they have gold embellishments on them, there's something, a sense of preciousness about it. But then again, I've been using that for like a year and a half, non-stop, and then I suddenly stopped, and I went back to the Heathen Otherworld deck, which I've had a few years, which is quite an expensive deck I bought in America, but worth every penny. They're limited edition decks, They're a beautifully painted and illustrated on very, very high quality shiny card, and they're a bit little larger, but they're narrow, so they're easy to deal with. Don't get big decks; they're very hard to deal with, and physically dealing with them. And I've just fallen in love with that deck all over again. There's a gentleness about it. There's a softness about it. It could be a seasonal thing as well. Coming into the autumn, and I've gone back to a sort of a deck that's not so lush. It's a lot of the scenes in it are very kind of almost frugal, would be the word I'd use, but beautifully illustrated. Particularly the figures. Their image of the devil is amazing. It's an amazing image of the devil, and it's the men and women that are painted and things like the lovers and stuff like that. They've got very real expressions on their faces. It's a sexy deck. It's got it's a very I find it very sexy. I don't know why. It just does in that kind of primal, not primal like nasty sex way. Primal like man woman encounter, chemicals, charisma. Let's get it on, but let's not jump. Let's not be nasty about it. Let's play the kind of romance game. That vibe about it. That's that vibe about it, which is the sexiest thing of all, I think, and the sexiest is sexiness of all. And if you have decks, vary them. Don't be having M&M Smarties, 1,000,001 deck attitude. Nothing wrong with collecting them. Stick for a deck for a while. If you feel it's not giving you what you want, move on to another one. Don't be afraid to go back to an old one and rekindle the romance again, like I have with the Heathen Otherworld deck. And the deck that's right and the deck that's best is the one that's right for you.